very happy to be here and have a little conversation, obviously, primarily about what we see in the investment world on the intersection between real estate and technology. For the audience, maybe give a very 1-minute synopsis of myself. So I'm actually from Amsterdam originally, so bear with my accent, please. But after my studies, lived in Asia, lived in South America, and now in the US. So calling in here today from Chicago, and got involved in real estate 7 years ago here in the US, and then pivoted into what is now called PropTech. So all the technology in the built environment, worked for a Wall Street investment bank, and then set up our own business. What we basically do at the PropTech Connection, we sit in the middle of the ecosystem. So we sit between investors, technology buyers, and the startups. So just to give you a feel of quantum, this is basically where we play and a sense of the market. So there are around 15,000 PropTechs in the ecosystem globally. We mapped that out from a real estate centric lens. Obviously, this is a global play, right? It's very much on the forefront. I think some of the key things that we're seeing in the market, obviously, is all-time lows interest rates, right? So I think some of those macro challenges, obviously with high inflationary forces, unfortunately in Lebanon, I suppose you definitely know what I'm talking about. And obviously in South America, you see that in numerous places, and now it's actually coming into Europe and the US as well, which we think is going to have a significant impact, not only on the real estate side, but also in terms of investments and then more importantly on valuations. So in our network, we have access to over $10 billion of capital. What you see on the investment side, obviously you see a lot of venture capital firms deploying capital in these startups, early stage and later stage. But what you now start to see is that more generic funds are starting to look into PropTech. A lot of capital is pouring in all across the world. The Middle East, actually, we see a lot of capital coming from some sovereign wealth funds. You see private equity funds looking for consolidation. It's a very busy space. It's very regional biased. And again, I always like to mention this, but it's the largest asset class in the world, right? So just to give you a feel, you have the value of all real estate in the world is 25 times the total amount of gold that has ever been mined, just to give you a feel of quantum. And obviously, for that reason, let me actually go through this. So here are just some of the things that we're seeing in the market regarding, again, real estate and technology primarily. Basically, all the unicorns are either based in the US or China, and that's simply to do with the fact of the size of the domestic market. So real estate and construction is vertical, right? It's a very broad mandate, but what you see there is that sales cycles are very long. So it's very difficult to get clients, right? So it's not as fintech or other tech verticals, let's say. So once you're in a certain company, you have them as a client, RFP processes of 5 years, very likely that you stay there. So what we see is if you're able to make it to a Series B, Series C round, it's much more likely that you actually go for a full IPO. So this is some of the things. Capital, I don't think there is a challenge in terms of capital. Here's some of the things that we are seeing in the market. You see private equity funds coming in much earlier in the cycle. There is only so many good deals, right? So those guys are starting to look in. You see on the investor side, the quantum of capital is in the US. I think in venture world, it's a US word, right? So it's obviously invented here. But what that means is that you now see a much higher risk appetite from US investors to deploy capital in other markets, so Europe, APAC, etc. And what we then do, our role is to basically bridge that gap, right? So we bring investors to PropTechs and we help buyers, so the real estate companies, engineering groups, and general contractors, let's say, or agencies, the CBREs and the JLL of this world. We help them source technologies that solve commercial problems. So on a global scale. So valuations, as I mentioned, all-time highs. That's also one of the reasons, again, why we see a lot of particularly US investors looking for those opportunities in different markets. Obviously, the way we look at PropTech, it's a highly fragmented space. It's a very difficult market also to sell into because of different reasons. I won't bother too much with that, but I wanted to point out one failure in the investment world in PropTech that you may have heard of, Catera. They actually raised over $1 billion in funds from SoftBank. You may have heard of those guys, obviously a large fund. But my point here was more around that not necessarily getting a lot of capital is the right way to go. Doesn't mean obviously that you're going to succeed. And what these guys wanted, and where we think they actually made a mistake, is that they wanted to take over the entire supply chain of an entire industry. So at one point they were burning $1 million a day. And obviously at the end of the day, they basically went bankrupt. So just to give a feel here, what we also see in PropTech, as previous speakers pointed out as well, is that some of these companies can actually scale very, very quickly. So we are looking into markets like India, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, underserved regions, I would say, where with the right capital partners and the right team executing a tight strategy, means that there is a path to market dominance in a very short period of time, obviously with significant multipliers for investors. So we see a lot of interest there. We think some of those markets are really interesting from a macro perspective. Also looking now with the challenges with Russia, China, you see a lot of capital allocation moving from China, particularly to India. So for that reason, and also if you look into the demographics in Southeast Asia, we think that region is something you really want to have a close look at from an investment standpoint. And then just what I wanted, this is probably not quickly wanted to do. Yeah, here. So just some of the multipliers, as I already referred to, some of the market drivers that we see here in the world in terms of thematics, and then I'll wrap up what we see in the market regarding real estate investments, and obviously in conjunction with technology, is around one, ESG. I guess everybody has heard of it. It's a buzzword. If you ask me, I think a lot of people are talking about it, but if you actually look a little bit deeper in terms of actual capital deployment, not much has been happening to date. It's mostly talk, not much action, but we think we're at a pivotal moment right now where, again, if you look at the macro perspective, what's happening obviously in Eastern Europe, you see obviously the impact on oil prices, and as a result of that, it's a pivotal moment where you have to decide as a company or a private person that are you willing to pay a premium to push that ESG angle forward or not, right? So and what we are seeing in the market from large institutional players, insurance companies, pension funds, etc., that a lot of those are actually putting the needle. So it's now not about talk, but actually about implementation. So we see a lot of capital coming in, the likes of BlackRock and PGIM and some of those bigger players, I would say. So yeah, with that being said, I can talk much more, but I think for the sake of time, and Omar, I think you got a couple minutes in the front. I'll conclude it here. Happy obviously later on to take any questions or clarify anything that is unclear, but hopefully this was helpful. Over to you, Omar.